Hi guys, welcome back to yet another review. This time around I'm bringing you a trio of TinHifi IEMs, the C1, the T6 and the C3 Mark II. Two of them I have already previously mentioned in the past, although I didn't give them, I feel, the deserved attention or the deserved um, uh, ability to really show what they were about. The T6 is the latest one. It is a hybrid, in fact, not a single dynamic like the other two. Uses a microplanar and the T6, and ultimately in this review, the T6 will be the focus, will be the main focus, because this is the one that truly stands out. This is the special IEM, although the other two have got their place as well in their respective price points. Anyway, let's get this going. I'm going to talk about the C1 first. The C1 is their budget single dynamic. It's basically replaces the T1S and the T1 Plus, which were, I feel, IEMs that TinHifi tried to break away from their usual tuning style, which we got acquainted with in the T2, in the original T2. And the T1S and the T1 Plus, especially the Plus, they weren't bad IEMs per se. I feel that perhaps a little bit more polish in the way that the upper mids and the treble were done would have improved it. But anyway, look, this is always the case. I'm sure there will be people that will appreciate the T1 and S and the T1 Plus for what they were. The reality is the C1 is an improvement over those, and it is a significant improvement. It is a substantially better IEM. The interesting thing about here the C1 is that they've tried very hard to kind of give a sound which is what we then get in the let's say the more expensive models, and I think that's nice. It's nice to see a brand that tries to keep that house sound from the budget all the way to the top, so that I guess you could call it you have a natural upgrade. Although you always are getting a similar sound signature, you can feel the upgrade in terms of the materials used in the shell. You can feel the upgrade in terms of the actual driver that they're using, and I think that's important. I mean, and that's one of the things I definitely did notice in this comparison. I mean, you listen to the C1, and yes, up to certain volume levels and with certain songs, there's not much that is going to distinguish it from the C3 Mark II or from the T6. But then when you start really pushing things a little bit more, either the volume, or you start being a little bit more demanding with what you want to hear, or you perhaps change your source, then you start seeing where the C3 takes over, and then ultimately as well with the T6 takes over. So there is definitely a natural progression that makes sense here. Anyway, as I was saying, C1 is around the $20 price point. I've seen it a little bit below $20. I've seen it a little bit above $20. It's a nice IEM. I'm not going to deny it isn't a nice IEM. Obviously I'm talking about it and considering its price point, and its price point is a monumentally competitive price point. There are dozens of other IEMs. We just have to mention the 1 Year 2. We just have to mention the Wyvern Celeste models, or even maybe some offerings from KZ, to understand straight away that the C1 is up against a monumental amount of IEMs, which all have had time to let's say establish themselves as kind of segment leaders. And to that extent, I mean, yes, the C1 is fun. Yes, it is got a great bass. Yes, it is good if you are not looking for the ultimate in terms of of critical listening. I mean, there's really not much that I can criticize if I consider its price point. I'm just trying to get here the graph of it. Just 1 second. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There we go. There isn't really much that I can criticize here. I mean, the 100 kilohertz point the 100 hertz point that I usually like using as that kind of a base for comparison, to where it corresponds to in the mids and upper mids, and with that get an overall kind of, let's say, feel for the IEM sound. I mean, it is borderline there on the 2 kilohertz, so not an issue there. But it is the way that 2 kilohertz and above in the C1 is handled that I feel ultimately takes a little bit away from where it could be in that segment. Yes, at low volumes it's very engaging, it's very interesting, it's got a lot of detail, a lot of twinkles and sparkles. But once you start pushing the volume, I just feel that part of the spectrum just becomes a little bit more unpolished, and especially when you compare it to things like the Wyvern the Celeste, or when you compare it to the 1 year, that have had time to maybe polish up that part of the segment, or even when you compare it to things like certain KZ models, it is interesting at lower volumes. It can compete with them at lower volumes. At mid to high volumes, it shows a little bit lack of polish, and this is not a criticism, it's just the way they decided to tune it. And that's ultimately what I'm going to say, is that if you are perhaps a little bit sensitive to that higher part of the spectrum, maybe this might not be the ideal choice. As for the low part of the frequency range, the bass is really well, I mean, phenomenal bass. I feel that if they had maybe, like I said, just given it a little bit more of a tameness in the upper end and matched it with the bass, the overall signature would have been a way more appealing signature. And that's basically it in a nutshell. I mean, there's really not much more that I can say. It is a nice budget IEM that, you know, has in its competitors its biggest obstacle. There's a lot of other IEMs that I feel might be more generally accepted, but as always, there's always going to be an ear that will like the C1. There will always be a place for the C1 for those diehard, let's say, TinHifi fans. Now, moving on here onto the C3, and this is the one, the C3 Mark II, and this is the one that I want to start by apologizing, because when I initially talked about the Mark II, I mentioned that I didn't really notice too much of a difference between it and the original one, and it was true. It was true, and truth be told, I didn't really give time to play around with the tips more than what I should have played around. Yes, the Mark II apparently does use a improved driver over the Mark I. But I like I said, when I initially listened to it, I was like, okay, there's not much difference. The graph also didn't look significantly different, so I kind of put it aside, and like I say, and I apologize, didn't give it its deserved place. It is an IEM that currently you can pick it up for about $50 from TinHifi directly. I'm just trying to find you the graph. I believe it's this one. Let me just see. Exactly. And I think the biggest thing, once you found the right tip, which is what I did, yeah, and these liqueur tips or the BGVP white bore, they work absolutely incredible on it. I think the biggest thing here that these tips really do to the C3, the Mark II, is while with the stock tips, you still get that area there of 2-3 kilohertz being perhaps a little bit too, although graphically doesn't seem like it, but it seems to be a little bit, I don't know, unpolished somehow. I feel that with the wide bores, be it the liqueur or the BGVP wide bores, that part of the spectrum somehow just kind of tames down. Graphically, you don't see a difference, but listening wise, you do. In terms of the bass, again, we have that same sort of bass and bass level that you get, for example, on the C1, like I mentioned before. But due to the fact that we've now got a different driver, you do notice there's a different tonality to that bass. Also, the fact that we are using a resin shell and not a plastic shell, again, introduces certain differences to the overall way the sound is done. As for the pin again, it's a pin again which peaks at closer to 4 kilohertz. So I would say it pushes everything a little bit more forward in the sense that it's not early, that we don't have that gain in the mids earlier on that might maybe it sometimes bring an unnecessary harshness to the sound. I personally prefer that pin again to be a little bit closer to 4 kilohertz than anything, although, as I've said countless times, as long as it's above 2 kilohertz and that energy above 2 kilohertz is matched equally with what you have below 100 hertz in terms of the bass, that balance I think is important. If that balance is well done, then it doesn't really matter if the pin again is at closer to 4 or it's just after 2 kilohertz or really anything of the sort. But when I show you the graph, you'll kind of understand what I'm trying to say. Anyway, that energy past then the pin again peak and past the 2 kilohertz point that I like using is very nicely matched to what you get below 100 hertz, and the overall sound that you get is a warm kind of detailed sound. It's not overly detailed, it's not overly warm, it's a nice, almost kind of neutralish balance that you get there. Where you start seeing that maybe it loses slightly its composure, and I think it's not really loses its composure. I mean, this does use an LCP driver, and LCP drivers are known for not being the most detailed up top. which is a plus and a minus, and if you're not careful with the way that you tune it, then you might start getting a little bit of harshness associated with that higher frequency, and this is due to you wanting to get that energy that maybe you are lacking and that you want. And that's where I feel that the C3 Mark II, maybe on certain occasions with certain songs, and especially with wind instruments, I did find that once the volume started being pushed a little bit, it just became a little bit unpolished. It's not that it became aggressive or anything of the sort. It just lost its composure. So the composure that it maintained, very well with the majority of the songs that I was listening to, and with the majority of the genres that I was using to. I mean, from Dusk to Dawn, a little fugue in G minor, musical genocide, Elephant, to completely the opposite end with some dub or some EDM. It played really well. I mean, I really can't complain. Then with specific songs here and there, like I said, you would feel that lack of elegance that it was giving us before, and that's really my only nitpick. The other problem with the C3, well, the thing with the C3, the Mark II, is that again, it's priced at a point where you have countless other offerings, which again have had time to maybe cement themselves as kind of segment leaders. And I'm talking about a whole bunch of IEMs. I'm talking about the Venture Electronics, the Guangxi, No, I always say that name wrong. I hope Lee is not going to kill me, because he might be thinking that I'm trying to insult where is it? And the funny thing is, when I see the name, I can say it properly, but when I don't see the name, for some reason, I just have the tendency of just mispronouncing it. Guangxi, yeah, Guangxi, that's it, the UA Guangxi. Okay, fine, my apologies. You have the likes of the UA Guangxi, you have even some offerings from KZ which are pretty impressive, and of course I'm talking about the Phantom. We have as well the KB Ear, the TE Pro, the Tourbillon Pro. We have the Intuara, the Impact. These are all IMs which kind of sit within this price bracket here of the C3 Mark II, sorry. And so, it's not that it doesn't hold its own. Yes, it does hold its own, but I would say if you have the opportunity to listen to it, go listen to it, compare it to the others, and see what is your decision, what is your verdict ultimately. One thing that I just wanted to bring your attention is the shell here of the C3 is really, really nice. I don't think it does justice the video or the pictures or anything of the sort. It is a beautiful shell. I don't know the resin or what it is. It just looks really, really solid. It almost has it. Oh, maybe it's just my pair, but my pair, it almost looks kind of stone like, the finish of it. It's kind of got this porcelain kind of type of finish to it, and it looks just absolutely stunning. I mean, maybe, like I said, maybe it's just me, but it looks really good. Anyway, C3 Mark II, I think it's a solid upgrade over the C1. Solid upgrade. Well deserved, twice the price. And I think it's probably, of the three, the one that will be the easiest to kind of live with regards to what it costs and what it offers. Okay. I'm not taking anything away from the T6, mind you, but this is just for you to understand how solid I actually think the C3 is. It is a solid IEM. It is a solid IEM. Anyway, let's go on to the T6, which is what we want to know, which I think that's the main interest of you guys. T6 brings a nice selection of tips, brings a nice case. I like this new case that TinHifi has been using now on their products. The IEM itself is a beautifully machined CNC aluminum shell with this nice wood faceplate. It looks the business. Trust me, it looks the business. It looks way more expensive than its $119, I believe, costs. Nice cable. This cable reminds me of a cable that Let's Show was using in their IEMs a couple of years ago. Very similar. The only nitpick I have on this cable, only one, is the termination here on the IEM side. I feel that this terminal, when you have a nice, the plug side, this part here could have been equally nice, because the cable itself is very decent. I measured it, it's perfect. It's just this termination here that I think when you look at the whole package, it just doesn't do it justice. But anyway, that's just a little minor nitpick. Where it matters and what we want to know is what is a T6 about, and what is it special. Well, the T6 is a 1DD and one planar hybrid with 3 tuning nozzles, and the tuning nozzles, contrary to what sometimes we see happening with other IEMs offering this sort of tuning capability, they really do work. They really do give a different type of sound with each one of them. So and what is that sound? Okay, I think the T6 sits in a zone or in an area where we have a mildly U or V-shaped kind of balanced hybrid, and this will always, of course, be dependent on the nozzle you use. It's not a it's not an IEM that you can describe as being warm or mid-centric, or nor is it a kind of overly bright analytical type of specialist. It's an IEM that has, I think, its main focus on being clean, slightly lively, technically competent, and very adjustable with all of these nozzles. So overall, I think the thing that TinHifi tried to aim for here in the T6 is to, instead of reducing its target maybe audience and focusing on being a bass monster, or then focusing on being overly analytical, they try to do this very balanced type of sounding IEM, taking into account that they are using a planar, so wanting that planar to be very well integrated with the dynamic driver, and creating the sound which is balanced. It's all about balance. Okay, but breaking it down a little bit more, let me talk about the various parts here of the frequency and so on. I think definitely the bass is one of the strongest parts of the T6's performance. It's got a clean sub bass presence. It's got good and more than enough punch. A very disciplined, well-mannered mid bass. And what all this means is that there's no sense of bloat. I mean, it's the T6 gives enough sub bass, for example, to the sound to make it modern and engaging, but it never does it in a way that it can come across as being tuned thick or mid bass heavy or anything of that sort. No, it's got that right amount to make genres like hip hop and pop listening entertaining, and have the energy that they require. So it's all about being textured, having a tidy bass presentation that's got speed, that doesn't bloat, that doesn't muddy up things in terms of the mid range afterwards, and that's, I think, what most people want when you have a hybrid. You want the bass to handle the bass frequencies properly, and the fact that we then have that planar up top, I think it helps sharpen up the way that bass comes across, by just being implemented so well as it's been implemented in this case. I would say, just making sure that this is clear, that the T6 is very genre capable. It will do really well on most genres, but I think in electronic, pop, lighter rock, jazz, instrumental, some instrument, I think that's where it will shine. Although, my apologies, it will do well with most genres. Mid-range, this I think is where the T6 really is shining. Although I mentioned earlier, there wasn't any particular focus on any part of the frequency ranges, other than them being very balanced. But personally, I think that this is where the T6 really shines. When you have hybrid sets, you can sometimes get a sound which impresses at the extremes but leaves the mids feeling maybe a little bit hollow, a little bit disconnected. The T6, in my opinion, doesn't seem to suffer from that problem. It's the mids are extremely coherent, extremely natural, and very musical. I think that's the main thing. Very musical. It's not a mid-range presentation that in any way is recessed. Mind you, what I'm saying is using the green nozzle, not the black nozzle, which I'll get to in a second. Using the green nozzle, maybe with the red nozzle you might get red or pink. Maybe with that nozzle you might get a little bit of a slightly recessed mids, but with the green nozzle, the way that the mids are done are really well done. I mean, I really cannot complain. It's got that neutral, clean sound instead of being overly dense, maybe. Okay, I would say to kind of wrap up here the mids. If you like a mid-range presentation, where you like an excessive amount of emotional, let's say, sound, so maybe that kind of sound being overly thick, maybe the T6 might not be the ideal. But if you value that clean vocal placement, excellent imaging, uncluttered sound with instruments, and musical above all, very musical. I would almost say that this is kind of like a CD type presentation, if that is even a good analogy to do. While if you are wanting a more kind of overly organic type of presentation, more kind of valve type of presentation, this might not be where it shines. But mind you, and you guys know that I like that type of sound as well. I think that what they've done here is really good, and to be honest, I even think that those that might like the more warmer presentation, I think that if you actually spend a little bit of time with the T6 and play around a little bit with the tips, you'll be able to find the magic that it does have. So in a nutshell, this is all about being coherent. I think in the mids, very coherent and very musical. As for the treble, and I think this is where that nozzle then will make the big difference. You can have a presentation which can be overly lively, overly open, but then I think that presentation, and I'm talking about obviously the black nozzle, it's just going to push up the upper mids too far, in my opinion, and it's just going to become very fatiguing very quick. At lower volumes you might get away with it a little bit, but no. So I would say, although the T6 is not inherently a treble cannon, and that's down to the fact that they've been smart in the way that they've tuned the planar, it is absolutely capable of becoming very crispy, let's put it that way, if the wrong nozzle is the one that you use. So I would say use either the green or the red pink nozzle, in my opinion. That will give you then a sound which has got more than enough air, solid clarity, good edge and definition, and non-fatiguing listening, so you'll be able to listen to it for a long period of time. And I think, like I said before, the pink or red nozzle and the green one are the best ones for that. As for the timbre and the tonality and imaging and soundstage and so on and so forth, again, excuse me, when we are talking about hybrids, and be it with planar or not with planar, but hybrids, usually the timbre can be sometimes a little bit synthetic, can sound a little bit overly dry or metallic, and that's down mainly usually to the fact that the accompanying drivers that are being used are not being used in their ideal situation. So if you overtune a BA, or if you overtune a planar driver, or if you overtune an EST, this can happen. And I think on the T6, the core tonal coherence, I think, has been really well obtained. Again, taking into account two nozzles especially. And ultimately what you do get is a very coherent sound that is not in any way disjointed. Okay, so you don't get that separation of the DD to the planar driver. Obviously, the one that maybe does that ever so slightly better than the other is the pink as compared to the green, but the difference is minimal. But compared then to the black nozzle, you do notice that separation of the drivers, and I didn't particularly like it in that presentation. But anyway, the timbre, I think it's a well done timbre and tonality. It's instruments, they sound realistic. They sound, guitar twangs and cymbals. Everything sounds very realistic. And I think it's definitely good for a hybrid, which has usually those limitations. They've done a good job in terms of imaging. Again, good imaging, good separation, clarity. It's a very transparent type of sound. So I really don't think that in terms of imaging there is any problem there. Transients are excellent. Again, layering, detailed retrieval, macro and micro details, perfect. Again, not a problem there. Where if you are looking for that ultimate in terms of those particular things, yes, maybe this is not the one that will do a wow kind of kind of wow implementation. It's not going to be like a studio grade type of technicalities in that aspect. But when you consider what we have here and what the premise of the sound has been, which is to be coherent, to be very balanced, to be non-fatiguing, and to be musical, I think what they've done here is been really well done. Soundstage. Look, it is a wide soundstage, okay. But again, I think it kind of falls within the same issues as I was just mentioning before. In this attempt to have this balance, you have, yes, very good left-right abilities. You have a well-organized stage, but it's not necessarily a huge holographic stage, okay. But and again, let me repeat, this is all about this balance. They've always tried, I think, in the T6 here, find an IM which does everything really well, and by that, what they try to ultimately achieve is an IM that, although it could be a little bit better here or there, maybe that will be detrimental to other aspects. So try and find a balance where it does everything really good at a very high standard. I would say everything is above 80%, for example, in all of the technicalities, and be safe. And I think safety ultimately sometimes pays when it's well done like this. I mean, some brands, yes, do go for this kind of out of the box tuning, and they run the risks that come with that. But TinHifi, I think, with that safety in mind, they've done a really good job here. That's undeniable. Anyway, I think, in a nutshell, I've basically talked about these three models enough. Obviously, I think the takeaway that we can get is that the T6 is the better of the three. The price obviously is an IM that makes it become something that not all of us will be able to afford, but then again, it is not an IM that I think will break the bank, especially when you consider the accessories and the fact that you got these three tuning possibilities and everything. I mean, it is good value for money. It isn't. It's not something that you're going to say, oh no, it's too expensive. No, it is. It's got good value for money. $119, I believe, is not in any way excessive. You could argue, or you could come back with an argument, oh, but you have some other IMs which are already 1+2s, and you got other IMs like the Keyfine Quatio and the Celeste Yaksha and this IM and that. Yes, fair enough. You got a number of other options out there, but I feel that what TinHifi with the T6 has done is give us a solid IM that is safe in terms of its sound, it's safe in terms of its build, and if this is what you are wanting, if this is an IM that ultimately what you are looking for is something that's going to work well without you being too worried if this or that's going to be an issue, definitely this is a solid option. The only thing here that I would have liked would have been if TinHifi with that black nozzle would have maybe been a little bit more conservative in the way that they tuned that one, and make it something that, yes, is still noticeable, the difference between the other two and that third nozzle, but make it a nozzle tuning that could have been maybe a little bit more used, because honestly, like I said, it was really the only nozzle which I listened to it and very quickly I took it out because it just didn't agree with me, and I think I'm not the only one that's going to be saying that. As for the other two nozzles, top marks. Guys, as always, I'm going to show you now the graphs quickly, but as always, like and subscribe. Any questions, please feel free to ask me. Take care now. Okay guys, so let's talk now graphs. I'm going to start off by showing you here the graph for the T1 Plus, okay, which is this graph here, which on its own, it's actually not a bad graph. It's nice. It's got a, you know, this ratio that I like looking at. It's perfectly, you know, it's well done. It sounds good. It's got a nice thick mid bass, and that's, you know, good and bad. I think that thickness that it has here on the mid bass maybe was a little bit excessive, but the fact that they were also using a beryllium driver did help to a certain extent. But the T1 Plus as compared to the T1S was an upgrade without doubt. But now with the C1, and this is the graph of the C1 now, there's definitely been an upgrade. So they've reduced that bloat here in the mid bass, they've cleaned up the mids here a little bit, and it just sounds overall more competent. I mean, that 100 hertz point, as I was mentioning, it sounds borderline there on the 2 kilohertz, but the energy above and the energy below is not nicely matched. However, and as I mentioned before, once you start pushing the volume, this area here of the spectrum just becomes a little bit unpolished, not as nice as the graph might lead you to believe. But guys, this is $20, so this is a nitpick. This is not really a deal breaker or anything of the sort. The issue with the C1 is that it's got a lot of other IEMs out there which, you know, sound really, really good and have had time to make themselves more known in the market. So that's the C1 there. Now the C3, and I'm going to show you first the graph of the original C3. This is the graph of the original C3, and this is now the graph of, where is it? Where is it? T6. Yes, here we go. 13. I think I'm going to have to change the color. Yes, change the color, make it red. There you go. Okay, so this is now the graph of the latest C3. And it's the way that this part here of the spectrum has been polished up, which is, yes, where that improvement has been done, definitely. The bass has remained itself basically the same. But I think the biggest thing here, and that was my mistake initially, was not playing around with the tips. And the tips, and I definitely would recommend the wide bore tip. The wide bore tip on the C3 Mark II makes all the difference. It makes the sound be a hell of a lot more balanced. I mean, it really does make the difference. There is still, like I said, and this is all down to that case of the fact that they're using that LCP driver that at higher frequencies, if you don't want to lose a little bit too much of that brightness you have, or rather, if you want to still have a little bit of brightness, a little of detail, you have to tune it in a manner which maybe, you know, shows the driver's non-linearities, and that's what happens at mid to low. You know, at mid to low volumes it's fine. At higher volumes, on some songs, it just becomes a little bit less polished than ideal. That 100 hertz point there corresponds to just over 2 kilohertz, 2 kilohertz, good amount of energy before and above, you know, very equal. Just for the sake of comparison, and because I did mention this is the Guangxi compared to it. If I normalize it at 500, but even if I normalize it at 1 kilohertz, you will see that similarities are incredible between the one and the other. The Guangxi, where it, I feel, just excels over the Mark II, is the way that this higher frequency here is done, because we don't have that extra energy there in that let's say 4 to 8 kilohertz area. It allows for that elegance and that polish in the sound to be maintained at higher volumes better. That's, I think, the biggest difference. Overall, they actually sound surprisingly very similar. But that was just, for the sake of one comparison. And as for the T6, okay, so this is the T6 with the black nozzle. Okay, this is the T6 with the green nozzle, and this is the T6 with the red or pink nozzle. As you can see, bass is always basically maintained the same. What they change here is the energy levels of the upper mids and the treble and so on and so forth. If you notice here, straight away, the black one, okay, which is now being highlighted, it's just too much. That correspondence, if you're looking carefully at 100 hertz to where it corresponds here, it just makes things overly energetic at low volumes. Fine, it just becomes too much. So I didn't really enjoy this listening. As for the other two, they are very similar. Yes, you do notice a little bit of warmer presentation with the bottom curve, so the pink nozzle as compared to the green nozzle, which is the top one. Actually, you know what? Let me just make the green nozzle in green so that there's no confusion here. So green, green, okay, and let's make the other one red, so we can see the differences better and there's no confusion. So green and red, I think that's perfect now. Again, if you just out of curiosity, the red pink nozzle, it's very similar in its overall tuning to something like the one second, where is it, the into outer impact, exactly number 14. Very similar. You get a very similar type of sound, a little bit more of a V-shaped nature in the into outer, but the overall vibe is very similar, the same sort of bass and everything. As for the green filter, and taking away this way out, the green filter is a more conventional type of tuning, although not entirely fair. It's got a sound which is, again, is very similar to something like the into outer, the balance, with the T6 having just a little bit more bass presence, a little bit more sub bass presence especially, and that's basically it, guys. There's really not much more that I can say. I mean, just for the sake of comparison, this is the green nozzle on the T6 compared with the C3. Where is it? The C3 Mark II. There you go. Compared to the C3 Mark II, you can see some similarities, and you can see why I say there's a certain vibe in terms of the two IMs, how they sound kind of similar. And compared with the C1 as well, let me just put it over here, which is number 8. Again, some similarities, without a question. I mean, the bass is tuned in the same manner, the bass sounds similar, but you do notice obviously differences from the C1 to the C3 and from the C3 to the T6, without a question. I mean, it's noticeable. The quality of the bass increases exponentially, I would say even. The way they tuned in the mids, again, very similar, but you do notice again obvious differences in the way that the mid-range is done. And then it's in the higher frequencies that definitely the T6 is the one that comes out on top. It's the most balanced, it's the most it's very noticeable. You don't really have to be an expert in tuning. And I mean, I was even playing around with listening to them and asking my wife to again listen, and she immediately, without even question, said that the T6 was the best one. It was the one that sounded the best overall. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this little review. As always, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. You take care now. Bye-bye.